Welcome. I'm Professor Crabbit, and in this video, I'm going to put philosophy on trial. I'm going to ask the question, do we need philosophers anymore? And I have here a detail from a, believe an engraving where someone's about to be executed. In fact, for this video, we're going to pretend that it's a philosopher that's about to be executed. The actual title of this piece is actually a woodcut, sorry about that, is Execution of a Man at a Marketplace of a Town. So a philosopher might get executed in the marketplace because guess who used to hang out in the marketplace? Socrates. That was his favorite place to go, the agora, where he would look for authority figures who claimed to have knowledge and try to find out what that wisdom was. So this is about, do we need philosophers on trial? And in some ways for philosophers, it feels like this. We feel like we might lose our heads in the town center, right? There's a lot of shrinkage of philosophy departments around the country, around the world. And philosophers, in some ways, have had to defend themselves. And it feels like they're defending themselves from an execution. This particular artist is Leonhard Beck. He's German, lived around 1480 to 1542. The series title was called Weisskönig, which was a book, was supposed to be a mirror of princes, a book that was meant to be instructional for future political leaders, and it was worked on by Maximilian I, who is a Holy Roman Emperor in Europe in 1459 and 1519, so way past the heyday of the Roman Empire. And his secretary, Trite Zollrein, is helping him to do. I know I don't speak German, so it's probably not the correct pronunciation. But this was the secretary of Maximilian, and the project was never finished. Maximilian dies. Successor, the grandson, comes in and says, "Hey, I want you to finish this." And the secretary dies right after that. So it never gets finished, but there's a lot of wood prints that were made, wood cuts that were made, and this is one of them. And we're going to use it. It perfectly captures what's happening, right? In the agora. The philosopher is about to be executed. Who is the executioner? Well, for now, the executioner is going to be Marco Rubio. He's the United States Senator from Florida, and for many of you, this is going back a few years, but in 2016, Marco Rubio ran in the Republican primary for president, and he did pretty good. He won three different contests, right? He won Minnesota, he won the District of Columbia, and he won Puerto Rico. So he eventually lost to Donald Trump, who becomes president. He wins the primary and wins the presidency. And on the campaign trail, one of Rubio's line of attacks was he went after philosophy multiple times. And actually, if you want to do a little bit of research on your own, you can find videos on YouTube of one of the debates where he gives his line about philosophy, and the crowd erupts into clapping. Right? They're supportive of this line of attack. So we're going to see what Marco Rubio said, and we're going to go through and sort of evaluate it, and analyze it. So I'm going to give you two quotes. One is, "Welders make more money than philosophers. We need more welders and less philosophers." Right? Oof, that's hard. Hard to hear from a philosopher, but maybe it's true, right? We have to take this seriously. And second quote, I believe that before any of our young people take out student loans, that school has to tell you how much you can expect to make when you graduate from that degree, from that school, so people can decide whether it's worth borrowing tens of thousands of dollars to major in basket weaving. So here, basket weaving is sort of a replacement for philosophy. In many ways, philosophy is being compared to basket weaving. They're both sort of ancient practices, and perhaps we don't need to study them anymore. It's not so important. We have factories that build backpacks for us. We don't need to learn how to do basket weaving. Do we need to sit around and discuss these 1,000-year-old questions that we might discuss in philosophy? Is it like basket weaving? We need to take this seriously, and we need to consider the merit of what Marco Rubio is saying here. And he chose philosophy for a reason, right? This is not just some random thing he picked out. He's a professional politician. He does polling. He knows how to market himself and what's going to get, the most votes, the most applause. Philosophy is often ridiculed, right? We make fun of the philosopher. A story that I always found really interesting was that Harry Potter, most people know about Harry Potter, and what they don't know is that in England, when the book first came out, it had a different name than what most people in America know it as. Most people know it as Harry Potter and the Sorcerer's Stone, but originally it was called Harry Potter and the Philosopher's Stone. But when that book came to the US, the marketing team says this book is not going to sell that well if you have the word philosophy in the title. So they jettisoned philosophy and brought in sorcerer, and it did sell well. It was probably a smart move to make if you want to sell books. Don't put philosophy in the title. All right. So when we look at arguments, right, I've talked about in other videos, we have a conclusion. The conclusion is that you should do welding. You shouldn't study philosophy. You should study welding. But when we're evaluating an argument, we don't look at the conclusion. What we look at are the premises and the reasoning. And if those are solid, right, if the reasoning is all valid and the premises are all true, so we have a sound argument, then we should be persuaded, whether we like it or not, to accept that conclusion. So in evaluating an argument, we set aside the conclusion and we just look at the premises and the reasoning. So, and I've said in other videos that the thing we want to look at, the strongest things, are the facts that are presented to us that support the conclusion, and the principles that are presented that support the conclusion. So we can look at some of these facts and some principles in the argument. One fact is welders make more money than philosophers. Right? And with that as a principle, one should do what makes the most money. All right. Another fact is welders provide a service to society. Philosophers sit around and talk and have chips and talk more. Well, principle here, one should do something that concretely contributes to the welfare and progress of society. Another fact that we could say we have here in the argument is that welders help rebuild U.S. infrastructure, which is needed, right? We have neglected our infrastructure in this country. Bridges are falling down. Walls are sort of become decrepit. We have a problem. We need to definitely work on infrastructure. So this is certainly true. And I think all sides would agree that. Philosophers, though, do not fix or solve real physical problems. Right? Like a welder will go in and help make that rebuild that bridge or make sure it doesn't fall down. Philosophers don't do things like that. So, principle, one should do something that fulfills a real or concrete need in society. And another fact, a final fact here for the purposes of our video, is that philosophy is equivalent to basket weaving. Both are outdated, no longer necessary. And it is ridiculous to study these things in the modern day, right? Wake up, we're in the 21st century. Okay, so the principle here is one should do what is needed right now in society. Okay, so we have some facts, we have some principles. Now, if we're going to evaluate the argument, we got to make sure these are, in fact, true, or they're likely true, right? If they're likely false, or if they are false, that's a problem. That means that the argument is not going to be persuasive, right? So can we challenge any of these facts, principles? And, well, they were challenged. And so we can look at some of the challenges. I sort of grouped together the bottom three. I think those are all sort of similar. And then the top one is a little bit different. So the top one about making money. When you look actually at sort of mid-career, professional philosophers, on average, make more money than a professional welder. So some have said that that fact right there is false, and therefore we can't accept the conclusion. Though I think it's more complicated, because a lot of philosophers, maybe most philosophers, are not sort of tenure track faculty making that sort of money. In fact, most of us are adjuncts, and we do make less than welders. So I think actually it's complicated there, that fact. The principle that's sort of going with that is one should do what makes most money. We might challenge that too, right? We might say that sometimes making more money doesn't mean that that's what we should do. Maybe one should do what makes enough money to live off of and makes them happy or satisfies them. So we could challenge that principle that all we need to consider is just how much money we're going to make, if that's really the principle we want to live by, or if we want to change that a little bit. But certainly, if philosophy doesn't make you enough money to survive, which for a lot of people it doesn't, then maybe Marco Rubio has a point. Okay, let's go down and look at the other facts and principles. And here, I group all those together because they're really about sort of utility, right? Does philosophy offer anything? Does society get something out of philosophy? Is it something that we need right now? Is it something that will improve society? And I think those are important questions. And in another video, I'm going to address that a little bit more. We're going to look at somebody's answer. That's going to be in my Bertrand Russell interview on his article in praise of idleness. So for now, I'm going to put that aside, but I'm going to say those are legitimate concerns here and questions. Does philosophy have a function? Does it provide something? Is it useful? You might say that doesn't matter, that philosophy's value is not in what you get from it, but that just in itself, it has value, and that's certainly an argument to be made. But I think that's going to be a hard argument to persuade people with, particularly people who, are dealing with the difficulties of modern life. Okay, so we've looked a little bit at the premises that we can sort of gather together from Marco Rubio's argument, Senator Rubio. Let's look at Senator Rubio's reasoning, right? His inferences, how that works, and see if that's valid, right? And when we look at reasoning, we stop looking at exactly what somebody's saying. We just sort of look at the structure and see how it operates. And if we looked at just the structure here of the argument, it sort of follows at the bottom. I have here sort of the structure. We have two options, A or B. A is clearly better, therefore A, right? In this case, A is welding and B is philosophy. But we don't care what it is. We just want to look at the structure and determine whether that is sort of valid. Okay. To do that, I want to bring in a some things that were said in some articles that were written back in 2016, when Senator Rubio was really going after philosophy. There was a conservative thinker, writer, opinion writer named Yuval Levin who wrote some articles published in the National Review, a conservative magazine, where he talked about his friend, John McDowell. And John McDowell has books. Here is a picture of the cover of one, Mind and Weld. And it turns out that McDowell is both a philosopher and a welder. He got a degree in philosophy. He learned how to weld, and he does both. In fact, if you read a book like Mind and Weld, apparently he talks about how welding has made him a better philosopher, and philosophy has made him a better welder. So these two things are coexisting, and they're improving each other. So we take that and we go back to the reasoning, right? And we can say there might be a problem here, right? We might have a fallacy. One of the fallacies I've talked about in other videos is the fallacy of the false dilemma. It's where you give someone two options. You say, you got to choose between this or that, and you force them to decide. Well, if it turns out there's more than two options, then that's the fallacy of the false dilemma, right? We haven't been given that third option in the argument. So the reasoning is not valid because we found this informal fallacy of the false dilemma there in the thinking. So we have to reject the argument as not persuasive. That doesn't mean that Senator Rubio is wrong. It just means that the argument that's been given to us, as I've presented in this video, that is not persuasive. So we're going to have to keep thinking about this. So what have we learned here? We've learned that philosophy is often a popular target for criticism and ridicule. We've learned that philosophy's usefulness is questioned by some people, and that this is a legitimate concern, and we should think about whether and how philosophy is useful. And finally, perhaps we do not have to choose between philosophy and any particular profession, right? We might have that third option of doing both. Thank you.